Hello and welcome to the Ramped Up Intelligent Sales Onboarding brief webinar to discuss 5 ideas to cut down on ramp-up time anywhere from 33 to 50%. This is a brief re-recording of the webinar that was hosted on May the 12th at 2 p.m. So to get into it, an introduction to your narrator here. Scott Miller. I have over 20 years experience in sales and sales management, working with some of the largest corporations in the world. I've served as a chief sales officer at the top of the sales org chart, in the middle of the sales org chart, and as a division vice president of sales at Ceridian, and as a frontline salesperson as an application sales manager at Oracle. And many of the things that you are going to see today came about as through my experience, just like through most of us, through my experience in these separate roles. As an idea, as a chief sales officer at Social 123, I've always had difficulty getting tribal knowledge in the form of win stories out and propagated to my sales force. As a district vice president of sales at Ceridian, I had challenges getting best practices, especially from the minds of my A players, into my B players and underperformers. And as an application sales manager, I had a lot of difficulty trying to find the right thing to do at the right time because there was so much information. So just kind of give you an idea about my background. I'll give you a little bit of idea about the company, Ramped Up. We are a sales onboarding and enablement company, and we use the concept of win stories to help improve close rates and reduce ramp-up time. And the way that we're able to do that is that since we are collecting win stories and we're facilitating and curating thoughtful, informative win stories, we know what works inside your organization, so we can tell you what deals that you should be working on if they look like similar wins. And if you are working on those deals, so you can repeat some of the behaviors that we're able to make them close. That's the concept. So without further ado, let's get into the whole concept of the 5 ideas to cut down on ramp-up time. An interesting statistic, or 2 interesting statistics that I think really are a telltale sign of the impact that turnover has, and by a byproduct of turnover, you think of ramping somebody up when you get a new person on board, is that the average tenure of a frontline sales manager is 19 months, and 68% of sales reps plan to look for a new job in the next year. That's from a HubSpot statistic. So imagine those 2 ships passing in the night, right? You have less than 2 years as a sales leader to get what you want done before you're looking for a new job. And almost 3 out of every 4 reps that are on your team are looking for a new job, right? So that really starts with, you can see how that really is the impetus of turnover. And when you have turnover, the next thing you want to do is you want to mitigate the risk of that turnover. And so these really are some ways to cut down on ramp-up time to get your new sellers up and running quickly. And we'll go over these things in much more detail, but these really are the concepts. Number 1, provide new sellers with relevant use cases. And we'll discuss some of the statistics why that's important. Number 2, centralize material inside a CRM. So that makes it easy for the rep to understand exactly where to go, but it also makes it easy for the individuals that are collecting that data and put it in one central repository. Provide a self-directed framework, meaning that we want in our onboarding process, we want the new seller to be able to have a one-stop shop so they know exactly what to do, so they can, at a minimum, work at their own pace. Make exceptionalism expectation. Some real thoughts on trying to get what makes the outlier behavior of an A player, what makes those people special, and make those the standards and expectations of your new hires. And then ongoing reinforcement. The worst possible thing that we can do, and I'm sure that most sales leaders have seen this, is that you turn a one-time event such as sales training or new hire sales training, and you don't reinforce it. So all that information is lost, and adults need practicality, to ensure that information will be reinforced. So one of the things that, as we discussed before, that we understand the difference between an A player and the rest of the people that are on our sales team is a very old concept in terms of the Pareto Principle, right? The 80-20 rule, so that you are probably receiving 80% of your quota attainment or 80% of your revenue from the top 20% of your sellers. And so, we see that, as much as we want to try to get away from that statistic, just like closing your month out on the last couple of days of the month tends to be the norm, even though there are 25 to 28 other days throughout the rest of the month that we can close those deals out. They tend to close towards the end of the month. The same is true with this 80-20 rule. So instead of trying to run away from that concept, let's embrace that concept, right? We understand who these individuals are. Let's identify them. And what we want to do is to find out what makes them tick in terms of the tactics and the strategy and the tips that they have that make them successful. And then we want to socialize that information with underperformers and new hires. If you are selling B2B in a SaaS B2B, you certainly understand some of the alarming statistics of a 40% turnover rate. And so whenever you experience that turnover rate, we want to ensure that when those individuals are coming back in the fold, we have those new hires, we want to provide a standardized and self-directed onboarding plan to retain and expedite those individuals, reinforce that onboarding material in every deal, and centralize that material inside of CRM. And that's really how you'll make your A players, and what do you see these individuals doing to make them the most successful 20% of your sales force. Get that information out in front of those individuals, your new hires and your underperformers, so that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And that's really what we're looking to do in terms of these 5 concepts. So let's get a little bit deeper into these concepts and learn what that would mean in terms of return on investment. So we surveyed the participants and the registrants of this webinar, and the average ramp-up time based on the responses is about 5.5 to 6 months. And what we were looking to do in terms of trying to put forward some of these best practices and some of the opportunities that you might have is be able to expose your new sellers to these self-directed frameworks in the form of win stories centralized around best practices is a 33% improvement. So imagine what that would look like in terms of 3.5 months to 5.5 months, and the impact that would have, the return on investment you have with individuals starting to make their number. And then in terms of just the retention and the reinforcement of that information, if you expose that data that you teach and the material that you teach them in the onboarding process, and that's exposed throughout every single opportunity, then you will see an 80% improvement in terms of retention of that data. So these are some of the opportunities that you have as a sales leader in terms of making ramped up best practices. So discussing a little bit deeper in terms of providing new sellers with relevant use cases, some information that we've seen at RampedUp and some of the formal polling that we've done is that 73% of new sellers report the most impactful information that they received during onboarding came from peers in the form of real-world experiences. And so the opposite side of that coin is the people they're selling to, right? And so buyers surveyed saying that SAP has a recent study saying that the buyers that they surveyed reported that 90% of them were influenced by relevant use cases. So imagine the impact that we're talking about here. New sellers and sellers in general want content and context of win stories and use cases. Sales people, whenever they're talking to their buyers, the buyers want to hear that content and context to help them make decisions. So it's really what we're looking for in terms of getting that institutional knowledge inside of a format that can be purposed and repurposed. You see it today with brag emails and case studies and team meetings and recaps. Getting that information, that's the type of data that we really want to use as a knowledge base. We see that in terms of ramped up, and what we want to do is, in terms of getting a best practice in collecting these win stories, is that you really want to try to make this information as thoughtful and as provocative as possible. So, a couple of best practices in terms of getting win stories. Now, I'm showing you this here in the context of our app, but it doesn't necessarily have to be in an app, right? It can be in any other central repository. But one of the things that we recommend is that you have you set forward a framework to get the information out of the rep. Ask them these questions right after they've won the opportunity, so the honeymoon period is still ongoing. But you ask them some thoughtful and provocative questions to get the data or that information out of their heads and onto paper, and so that it's a consistent process, because we know salespeople aren't copywriters, and you want to stay on top of these people as well, right? Because we know that it's difficult enough to get a salesperson to update their forecast, much less do a win story. So we recommend staying on top of them directly after they've won the opportunity. as a couple of best practices. Next, you want to try to consolidate that information inside of CRM, because you want your individuals, you want your sellers to stay inside a CRM, in particular Salesforce, right? If that's what you're using. And so you may or may not know this, but Salesforce has a files tab where you can use information that might be on Google Docs, or might be inside of a Box account, or might be in all these disparate places that you have inside of your different portals for salespeople to go to. But you can consolidate this information inside of CRM, so that, in this case, Salesforce, so that individuals are stay inside of CRM, because once they're out of CRM, they're on Facebook, they're on ESPN, they're on Gawker, they're on Snapchat, they're on Instagram, and that's not where we want them. In terms of adding tools, so we talk about, as you start to make the decisions to add additional tools inside of CRM. This is an example, and I'm sure this is something that you already know, but just to reinforce that concept is, make sure when you make purchasing decisions for sales effectiveness and lead generation tools, ensure that they will keep you inside of Salesforce. The more you get out of Salesforce, again, the more propensity you have to stay out of Salesforce. So use the App Exchange. In terms of providing a self-directed framework, McKinsey & Company has an alarming statistic that says that new sellers are basically wasting a third of their time, because they're either waiting for their supervisor to tell them what to do next, or they know what to do next, they don't know where to find it, right? And the way that you're going to be able to get around something like that is to consolidate the concept of onboarding, really what we consider to be in this high five framework, right? So what we're saying is that these are the most important things that a salesperson needs to know. It keeps it very simple, right? High five is, obviously is a very boiled down and oversimplified way to think about sales onboarding. But if you keep it high level, then the sales manager, or the new seller will understand exactly what's expected of them. So think of this high in terms of hello. These are all the things that you need. Keep this, again, in a standardized, self-directed framework. These are the things that you need to do in terms of administration, procedure, tools to get logged on and get set up first couple of days. And then make it simple in terms of, why? Why are we in business? Tell a little bit of company history, industry overview. Who are we selling to? The journey they go through. What are we selling, and who's selling against us? How do we go about doing these things? And then when do we do them, right? So not only do you want to have a checklist, but you want that checklist to have days from start. So you're expected to do this certain thing in terms of the high five framework by this amount of time. And so that's really the concept behind it. Ensure that the sales, so you do it once, the sales rep knows exactly what's expected of them during the onboarding process and when it is expected of them. Right? So that's the concept. Put it all in a self-directed framework. You're supposed to do this by this certain date, and this is where you can go and find it. So it's linked out. And you will just watch that ramp up time shrink in front of you. Lastly, we want to make, or next to last, make exceptionalism expectation. And so what we recommend to do is to sit down with these A players, the people that are making your quota today, and find out exactly, as you go through the sales stages, how do they manage a sales process? Whenever they go through, the onboarding process, what do they find superfluous? What do they find interesting and important, right? When they're selling against their competitors or doing product demonstrations, what do they do that makes them different from their peers? I use a tool just as simple as SurveyMonkey to try to find this information out. Get this information down, put it in the form of a playbook, put it in the form of a best practice sales cycle so that your sellers know exactly what an A player is doing, to sort of demystify the whole concept of what makes them special versus the standard rote content not in context. And then lastly, you want to make sure that this information is in onboarding is ongoing. So alarming statistic, I'm sure most of you guys understand, is that 11% of sales training is retained after the first month. So what we recommend to do is, and this is again a little widget that we have inside of Salesforce.com, is to keep the information that you learn in onboarding and boil it down, specific to every opportunity. And what you'll find there is that your close rates will improve because they're working on qualified opportunities. Again, this is Scott Miller with RampedUp, and these are just some ideas to cut down on RampUp time 33 to 50%. By viewing this, you are eligible for a free subscription. So we look forward to hearing from you. Thank you very much.